The skirmish that we're going to be doing, we're going to be doing the Weathertop skirmish this evening. So I am, I want to talk about Weathertop in specific, and the Tower of Amon Sul, which used to be upon it, and sort of the Lone Lands in general. The Lone Lands are kind of like the game developers' pet peeve. I mean, it's sort of the classic example of one of the things that makes it really hard to do this. As the description of the Lone Lands, especially the description that we get in The Hobbit, is really uninspiring. This is in near the beginning of the roast mutton chapter of The Hobbit. Now they had gone far into the Lone Lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. No inns, no people, just hills and some ruins, and that's it. They don't even meet the trolls until they cross the river and get into the troll shells, of course. So it's there's not much to work with here in the Lone Lands, and there's a lot of this kind of space. There's a lot of this kind of sort of the narrative description equivalent of white space on the map. When we're just told there's really nothing much going on in this whole region. And the game developers had to kind of make stuff up. Of course, the big exception that we get to this in the Lone Lands is Weathertop. And we don't get Weathertop really in The Hobbit, of course, but obviously it plays a really important role in The Lord of the Rings. And if we think back to the role that Weathertop plays, we can see that it has a sort of an interesting and consistent role through kind of the history of that region as we get it. In The Lord of the Rings, of course, the primary importance of Weathertop, it's not of any political significance. It's not exactly of any military significance, though I suppose if there were actual war going on in the area, it would be. But the reason it keeps coming up into the story is because of the way in which, as Aragorn says, anyone who is on top of Weathertop will command a wide view of the entire area. And since everybody is kind of, sort of, we have this group of people all kind of following each other around and nobody knowing where anybody else is. I mean, there's this big fog of war issue going on in this portion of the Fellowship of the Ring, where we have the Nine Riders fanning out and trying to find people. We've got Strider trying to stay hidden from them and yet trying to find Gandalf, and hoping that Gandalf will find them, and Gandalf, of course, galloping very quickly hither and yon and trying to figure out where anybody is. And so therefore, because everybody's hunting for everybody else or attempting to hide from other people, Weathertop becomes really crucial. And that's why everybody ends up converging on Weathertop. You'll remember that when they get to Weathertop, Frodo asks, he says to Strider, surely you were hoping to find Gandalf here. And Aragorn says, yes, but the hope was faint, right? He wouldn't stay here long, so unless we arrive here at almost the same time, we really wouldn't be able to expect to meet each other here. Which, of course, then kind of invites the question, why then exactly did you come? Aragorn is so eager, remember, to get a view of the land around, to get a clearer sense of where people are. Can he see Gandalf? Can he see, because you can see the road for a wide area in both in both directions, and there's not that much cover in the flatlands, in the lowlands. So what you can see from the ruins of Amon Sul, what you can see from the top of Weathertop, will help. He's hoping will help to guide him a lot in trying to figure out how to avoid the Black Riders. Remember, Aragorn is so eager to see the view around and to get some sense of where they are and where everyone else is, that he loses his head, right? And they stand up there, in a place where they can be spotted from the road on the pinnacle of the hill. And he sort of chides himself for doing that, and also for not exploring and searching the ground down, by their camp thoroughly himself before he went up there. And of course, by the time he gets down there, Pippin and Sam have merrily trodden on all of the signs, and he can no longer interpret who's been there. So this is the role that it plays in the Lord of the Rings. It is this place which becomes a meeting place. Gandalf and the Black Riders encountered each other there. Very shortly afterwards, Frodo and Aragorn encounter the Black Riders there, and this, all of these encounters keep happening because of the prominence of Weathertop and its significance for sort of staying on top of what's going on. That is, in a sense, the role that Weathertop always played, and the Tower of Amon Sul upon it. Of course, we know that there was a tower at Mythmoot last month. Chris Pearson pointed out something which I had never noticed before, or I'd never thought about before. He was pointing out that he has never seen a single artist's depiction of what the Tower of Amon Sul looked like. There are lots of places that have been depicted, both places that we meet in the Lord of the Rings and places that we just kind of hear about in the Lord of the Rings. But one place he was emphasizing he has never seen a picture of is the Tower of Amon Sul, which I think is pretty interesting, really. So they built the Tower of Amon Sul, and you think of how important Weathertop was for everybody in their searches there, and how much more important it was as a lookout point and as a military strong point in this area back in the time when there were clashing armies here. And we've done some review in weeks past of the battles in the North Kingdom between the three sort of remnant kingdoms of the Dunedain, Rhudaur and Cardolan and Arthedain, and we're told in Appendix A that the Weather Hills, and Weathertop in particular, lie almost exactly at the middle. Like, they are right at the frontier where all three of those kingdoms met. And one of the main things when those kingdoms were at war with each other, one of the primary points of emphasis in their battles was the possession of Weathertop and the Weather Hills, because whoever controlled those had a really significant advantage, not only, of course, because of its military position, but also because, of course, there was a Palantír in the Tower of Amon Sul, which seems to emphasize as well the role that tower played, right? That sort of the putting of a Palantír in that tower seems to be just kind of sort of emphasizing the role that tower already played. It's already this sort of lookout point, and that concept is just being sort of emphasized by the fact of putting putting one of the Palantíri there. One of the things that I find really interesting about the way in which the game developers have developed the Lone Lands as a whole is that, and I don't know whether this was sort of their plan or they were kind of thinking about echoing the old history and everything, but the game situation that they've created in the Lone Lands, I find echoes the Middle-earth history of it in some pretty cool ways. The Lone Lands is the one place in all of these sort of early regions, it's the one place where we see the sort of the threat coming from both directions. Like if you're in the North Downs, for instance, the threats there are all about, the incursions from the north, Angmar advancing and the orcs descending upon the farmlands there, and, things kicking up in Fornost again. That's what the sort of the primary plot of the threat in the North Downs is. In the Lone Lands, you get incursions from the north. You get, significant forces which are explicitly allied to Angmar, in particular, in the Garthagarwin region and the descendants of Rudaur. You've got all those hillmen and everything up there who are who are affiliated with Angmar, as the hillmen ever were in Rudaur. But at the same, so you've got that pressure from the north, kind of like the North Downs, but then it's not all the way from the north, just moving down through the mountains as in the North Downs, but still we get that Angmarim presence. But then you also get the White Hand Orcs and Goblins coming up from the south, and the Saruman influence. So again, we find in game the Lone Lands being this kind of frontier zone, with the incursions from the north and the incursions from the south, and everything with Weathertop in the middle, right there at the center of these things. I think that the way that they've echoed that is really interesting. And the last thing I'd like to add about the Lone Lands is that I think that the Egline, as a sort of a people group in the game, are a really interesting invention. They've been, since near the beginning when I started playing, they've been one of my favorites of the sort of people group inventions that the developers came up with. On the one hand, I like it just because of the sort of the simple cleverness of it, right? When you're when you want to populate a region which Tolkien explicitly said had no people in it, right? You're confronted with a challenge, and the way that they met that challenge was a solution which seems to me really kind of typical of the LOTRO approach, right? They want to do their own thing, and they certainly want to include, people and storylines in the North Downs, and not just have it be a region, with like tumbleweeds rolling around in it. But at the same time, they're not just gonna like flatly deviate from the text either. They're not just going to completely ignore the text and be like, actually, it was thriving and teeming with people, despite what Tolkien said. So what do? They make it, the area which is the domain of this really secretive people who don't show themselves to travelers, and who are really cautious and leery of trusting anybody new. Which, of course, explains perfectly well why Frodo and the others, nor Bilbo and the dwarves, ever encountered anybody in the Lone Lands, because they wouldn't have. And I think that that's a really, really clever way about it. One question I had, though, and I wanted to actually kind of open this up, some of you guys might know this answer much better than I do. In the game world, I've been having a hard time I'm trying to understand, where are the Egline supposed to come from? From whom are they? Are they supposed to be descendants of, maybe the people of Cardolan? Are they supposed to be the descendants of one of these Dunedain kingdoms? Are they related to the Bremen? Are we supposed to imagine that these are Bremen that have kind of moved out and taken up their living there? The Forsaken Inn seems to suggest a Breland connection, as we see explicit links between Oscaruth and the Forsaken Inn, as well as explicit connections between the Forsaken Inn and Bree. So it kind of seems like they're linked, but it doesn't. They don't really seem to come off like the Bree men. I don't know if we're supposed to. Does anybody know anything about this? Any thoughts about the Egline and their depiction? By the way,
as many times as I've read the script for it, it definitely seems like the Forsaken Inn is more of an outpost of Bree. It's a travel route between, I think, probably Rivendell, if it's on the same route or something like that. But it was a inn that had cropped up as a travel route among Breland. But for the Eglines living in Osgurth, they're definitely more like refugees. They're all living in tents. They're not living in buildings at this point. They're all they all said that they had gathered from other places. I'm assuming it was places like maybe Trestlebridge or something along that line. Like they're refugees. It sounds like they're refugees from the north that had settled south.
Yeah, perhaps so. Perhaps so.
Yeah, I definitely get the sense that they're from the north somewhere rather than the south.
Rather than the south?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the style of dress is more North Downs like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. much more that than Breeland. I agree. I have a hard time associating for that reason the Egline with the Breelanders in game.
I always
anyway.
think of them as mini rangers.
Right. Yeah, they seem more like the Rangers.
Ranger wannabe.
Yeah. Exactly. But sorry, there was someone else was one of the.
They seem very. They seem very nomadic. They settle in these ruins. They didn't build the city of Oscaruth. They just took it over, kind of. But I don't think there's any source of where they actually came from. They're just like, hey, look, here's a nice city. Let's settle here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
It sort of implies it's because their former place was razed to the ground. I mean, that's what you do.
I was able to find a lore book reference if you guys want to hear it.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it says, these are descendants of an ancient people who have forsaken the towns and cities of civilized folk and choose to live as free men in the wild. They scavenge trinkets and relics from the remnants of Arnor to trade for the necessities of life. The Egline are wanderers, but they will sometimes stop and make a temporary home in one set of ruins or another, which they call their ruin hold. The current ruin hold lies far beyond Bree, just off the Great East Road, amid the ruins of the once great fortress of Ostgoroth. Once a castle belonging to the kingdom of Rudour, it fell long ago in the wars between that realm and Arthedain.
Okay, that's interesting.
Middle-earth Romany.
So it sounds like they're either descendants of the people of Cardolan and Arthedain, or they're exiles from Bree and Trestlebridge and other such places.
Right. Yeah, and of course we get that that business with them being sort of scavengers among the ruins in some of the initial quests that you get in the Forsaken Inn. Down to what is it, Amon Ariel?
Minas Ariel, yeah.
Minas Ariel, yeah, of course, yeah. Minas Ariel, which is my favorite named ruin in really pretty much the whole game, because of course Ariel refers to dreaming. It's the name of the narrator figure in the Book of Lost Tales. So I really like Minas Ariel. But anyway, they do, as Trendok was just saying, they do sound like gypsies, like something more like a gypsy culture. It's. I mean, I think the way that they put them together is really interesting, and I'm looking forward to. I did not do my full completionist thing when I went through the Lone Lands before, but I'm actually now in the middle of a more detailed study of the Lone Lands, and I'm really looking forward to getting back to Oscaruth and sort of exploring that a little bit more thoroughly than I did before. So, anyway, well, thanks everybody. It's a little bit of background in the area that we're going to tonight, and a little bit more regional history. And it's time to invite Pine Song up to come and introduce us to tonight's skirmish.
We stand up straight to stop the dead that come to cleave old Candaith in two. We hold the horde of hate that drives a barrow's blight to the broken hill. Withered whites and wailing shades do screech and scrabble up the steepest pads. With light we'll lead the living stand until the time the attackers wane. We stand at Amon Sul tonight. We stand to stop the strangling foe. We stand to strike a sturdy blow and drive the dark and dead from sight. Stand at Amon Sul is a skirmish that opens up at level 25 and that also requires that you unlock it through either purchase at the LOTRO store or to be VIP. So if you do not have it unlocked, I suggest you take care of that now before we get started. In this particular skirmish, it's a defensive skirmish, and you are to hold the hill from the attackers in there. Now, unlike Siege of Gondomar, where you are running all over the place, very often you can get away in just standing in one spot, especially if you're a hunter. A hunter just could find a good spot and stay there the whole skirmish. Well, if it weren't for those dreaded campfires. In this skirmish, you have a big central bonfire, and there are 5 additional fires all around the ring of the hill. These must be kept lit all throughout the skirmish. Why? Because if there were no lights at all, if you were in complete darkness, you would be at minus 100% on your attack abilities. So that's not good. The central campfire, which stays lit all throughout the skirmish, gives you a bonus. And every single campfire you're near of the 5 also gives you a lesser bonus. And together, these help to compensate against that darkness penalty. Now, in solo runs, if you have all of them lit and you're in a nice central location, you're actually getting an overall bonus because the bonus you get exceeds the minus 100%. When you're in a raid, you're barely squeaking by, and you're probably at a loss wherever you're standing because it's hard to be in the light of all of them at once. Therefore, try to be in the light of as many of them. Don't try to stray too far outside of the ring of Amon Sul, because the further you're from the central campfire, the less likely you're going to be in the area of too many of the lights, and you don't want to be way out on the fringe. Where are you going to be facing here? You are going to be facing whites. You're going to be facing those spirits. You'll be facing white spirits, and you'll be facing bats. You'll be with Candaith, who will be standing near the central bonfire. Candaith must stay alive throughout the skirmish. Whatever you do, keep him alive. Now, fortunately, you'll only be facing 2 enemies during every single wave. It is the lightest of the skirmish. Of all the skirmishes, this has the lightest. You always face 2 at a time, and exactly what strength there will be depends on it. Let's say if we're in a full fellowship run. If we're in a full fellowship run, then you'll be facing signatures and elites. And let's face it, a pair of elites or a pair of signatures, that's rather light doing. On the even number waves, you can get a lieutenant with them as usual. So you could have your usual lieutenant coming in. So you could have 3 on an even number wave because you have 2 mobs plus a lieutenant. The boss fight, though, is where all goes loose. Everything goes. During the boss fight, you are going to be running into a Kargul, who is going to be summoning skeletons all over out of the ground, all over the place, and whatever you have to do, this is when you really have to pay attention to Candaith, because I've seen Candaith fall during the boss fight the other time in the skirmish. And the only other time I saw him fall was when a Bloodrook came in and raked him to pieces because we forgot to pay attention to the Bloodrook. So do pay attention to the lieutenants. Do pay attention to the boss fight, because during the boss fight you will be getting whites all over the place. And some of them will be going after Candaith, most likely. Now, I told you earlier that you want to keep the lights lit as much as possible. That means you should have someone in your group who is dedicated to keeping those fires lit. That's their job. When those go out, that person immediately drops what they're doing. It should not be the tank or the main healer. Go about, light the bonfires so that we can keep lit up as much as possible throughout the skirmish. There is one exception.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, there's one exception to keeping the bonfires lit. There is an encounter that happens during the 3rd assault where you're supposed to touch a cairn stone, and once you touch the cairn stone, in order to finish the encounter, you must let all the torches go out. As soon as the last one goes out, the boss appears, and when he appears, then light the torches. Or I should say the bonfires. It's really bonfires. You use a torch to light the bonfires. You grab a torch, you go around, light the bonfires. Any questions?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is this one of those where it's going to make a big difference between like small fellowship or full fellowship as far as the difficulty of completing it?
Not really. The only place where it makes a difference is the boss fight, because you get more and more skeletons are going to be whites, I should say, will be popping up during the boss fight when you get into larger sizes. But other than that, the difficulty really doesn't ramp up all that much during the main point of the